So this was originally supposed to be a 5K subscriber special, but some things happened and now it feels a little bit silly to call it that. So inconvenient when people love and support your work, I know. So we're just gonna call this an almost 10K subscriber special. I really appreciate everyone answering my request to make this video possible. I didn't expect that many questions, but I tried to answer as many as I could. If I didn't get to yours, it's probably that I couldn't think of anything interesting to say on the matter, like maybe I felt I'd already said all I had to say on the subject, or most frequently it was because somebody else had already asked a similar question. Also, I chose to answer them in a specific order that I thought would help the video flow best, so if you asked multiple and I don't get to all of them in one go, the other ones might come up later. Also, I'm saving most of the sappiness for later, but a handful of people just commented oh, I don't have any questions, but I really like your videos, and thank you, you guys are so nice. Okay, so as expected, a popular repeat question was, who is the knight? So I'll preface this by saying that the identity of the knight is actually one of the less interesting Deltarune mysteries to me, because I've yet to see a theorized motivation for the knight that really compels me that much. If they call themselves the Roaring Knight, they presumably want to cause the roaring, but that doesn't seem like it'd be a good thing for anyone, so I have to wonder if their idea of what the roaring is conflicts with ralsei somewhat. I don't think it's kris. The fact that they've made one fountain is already very interesting, and I don't feel like them having made the other ones really adds much. I guess my favorite knight theory is that Mayor Holiday is opening fountains to try and find Des. I guess my issue is because I can think of plenty of interesting and plausible means and motives for various characters to open fountains, but not much that would make any one character open every fountain. So I actually really like Cammy Boy G's 7 Knights theory. If you haven't watched that already, go watch it, even if you think that's ridiculous from the title alone. I'd still give it a watch because it's well thought out and just plain entertaining and well made. There is one motive for the knight that I remember hearing somewhere, that the knight is doing this for the purpose of being an obstacle in the story, because hypothetically they could cause the roaring very quickly by just making one fountain after another, but if that happened we wouldn't have a story, so they don't do it. So maybe the knight wants to be stopped, or they want the characters to have a chance to stop them. I'm not sure which character I would attach this motive to, but I do like the idea. Not Asriel, and I think a lot of other people asked, favorite Deltarune character? I don't have one. I really like all the main characters, so it's hard to choose, but the ones I'm most defensive of, and therefore I guess actively passionate about, are ralsei, noelle, and berdly. When it comes to the non-main characters, I also adore Queen, Lancer, Rules, and Catti. I don't usually delete comments unless I consider them to be hateful, and most comments are very nice. But one time somebody commented on the berdly video that Lancer was more annoying than berdly, and I just deleted it. Biggin Screw 021 says, would you like to see Papyrus in Deltarune, and what do you think about Toby hiding him? Of course I'd like to see Papyrus. I don't think he'll play any more major of a role than Sans or alphys will in Deltarune. And I feel like the decision to deprive us of the fan service of getting to see such a beloved character is probably commenting on something. I doubt we're never going to see him though, that'd just feel kinda mean, and the joke of him not being there can't work for the whole game. I also doubt Sans' brother is someone else in Deltarune, cause literally nobody would be happy with that, it wouldn't be that funny. And apparently their house is still named pap_house in the files. Squidward Tentacles 8659 asks, what's your opinion on the Jaru suspension of disbelief thing? Do you think that the game acknowledging its gameness and the player ruins or enhances the overall experience? So I haven't watched the video that this is referring to, but I do know of it. Snarlinger has an excellent video responding to it, and I agree with basically everything he says. It's a very respectful video. So I'll direct you to that. But I also want to specifically argue against the idea that the player possessing Kris would mean that the game is condemning you for playing it. Because the discarded vessel sequence makes it very clear that this isn't our choice either, and it's never implied that us choosing not to play the game at all would mean Kris is free in universe. I feel like a lot of people assume that, but we have no reason to believe it, I don't think. Because we're given the option to give up after a game over, and all that happens as a result of that is presumably the roaring. Nothing good happens when we don't play the game. Droicon asks, when did you get into UTDR? So I got Undertale for the Switch for my birthday in July 2021, so I played it later than most people, I think. And I didn't actually finish the game until September because I was frustrated with the Metaton fight and dropped it for a little while until Deltarune Chapter 2 came out, and I was like, oh, I gotta catch up on this. And then I finished it and I played Deltarune in October 2021. Any big opinion changes about Deltarune / Undertale? For a really long time, I did not like Spamton very much. First of all, he was all over the internet in the month before I played Chapter 2, so I got sick of him, and then when I did play Chapter 2, I was scared of him. He was weird, and his music was weird, and Pippies remind me of bugs, and I got itchy, and I didn't know how to spare him. I kept dying, and I was like, I just want to go back to Queen and Noelle. But I've developed a tolerance to him, even though his excessive popularity used to, and still kind of does annoy me just a bit, but he is funny, and he is a pretty good character. Also, I originally misread this question as like, what changes would I make to Undertale and Deltarune, so I'll answer that. I wish the pacifist ending included the implication that Flowey was also going to the surface, because that is what canonically happens as seen in the alarm clock dialogue, and it feels like Toby Fox decided that would be a good idea only after he finished the game. Like, the narrative that we see in the alarm clock dialogue is that even if Asriel's always going to be Flowey, that doesn't mean he's doomed, and I like that, so I think it should have been more present in the actual game. I also agree with Dork's video about how the whole thing with Undyne lying to Papyrus should have been resolved. I like Undyne, but I think she's unfortunately the weakest of the main 6. Generally, I do like Undertale's pacifist ending, but some of the execution of its final scenes is a bit rough, like Asgore should have been treated a bit more seriously, and I hope Deltarune does him more justice. So far, it kind of hasn't, but I do expect that to change because he's been a background character. Condiment-HZ4OG asks, what are your thoughts on the Deltarune combat system and what additions would you make to it? I think it's alright. I remember Spooky Dude made a video criticizing it a while back, and I think I agreed with most of his points in that video. I think it'll probably get a bit better in future chapters, but to be honest, I'm more of a dialoguer than a gamer, so it's not much of a concern to me. Nathaniel Wolf 3192 asks, thoughts on the Noelle Angel connections? Do you think Deltarune's going to have multiple people fulfill the role of the angel, or is it going to be one specific being? So obviously these connections are important, but I've never been able to understand how people will so casually take it as a given that she is the literal actual angel, like not related to the angel or symbolically the angel, but the literal angel. Maybe this is a semantics issue on my part, I don't know, but Noelle being actually God would have to be a huge plot twist, and such a huge plot twist would not be foreshadowed this heavy-handedly, I don't think. I don't have any super fully formed thoughts on the angel beyond the religious symbolism. I think Noelle's connections to it suggest she'll be an opponent to the prophecy, especially since ralsei has like devil connections. Player angel kind of makes sense to me, seeing as we're some kind of higher power to Deltarune's world, but I'm also pretty sure Gaster summoned the player in order to fulfill the prophecy, so I'm not sure. Then again, I suppose Gaster needing us for the prophecy is the same thing as him needing us to move the story along and see it through to its end, and Deltarune will inevitably end with us, like, not playing the game anymore, aka being banished, so I think that kind of holds up. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, I haven't thought about this that seriously. I ate to cookies 890 asks, do you have any hot takes about the theories of other channels like Jaru or Andrew? I love Andrew's videos and I often watch his streams. I don't really watch Jaru like I said, but I think my hot take would be that some people are kind of weird about him. Like, I don't think thinking his theories are bad warrants the amount of vitriol that some people have towards him. Hi, Willow. Hi. Do you agree? Andrew McLaughlin 1249 asks thoughts on Woody theory or just crack theories in general. I don't generally subscribe to crack theories, but I did always think Woody theory was like fun and creative. It's not that serious, it's nothing worth getting angry about. Puddle9079 asks thoughts on Molly Stars' device theory. First of all, I love Molly Stars' like style of editing. Part of the reason I wanted to do an AMA is just because I thought theirs was fun, although I don't think this will be quite as long. I really like device theory. It almost doesn't feel like a theory to me, it just feels like a really solid analysis of the game. And I imagine I'll be rewatching part 3 a few times before the next chapters come out. O-Carto and I think some other people asked, will Gaster be seen in-game? So I think Gaster will explicitly introduce himself maybe near the end of the game, and we will learn a little bit of concrete info about him. I think we deserve that much, but my hot take is that he'll still remain like a disembodied voice, and we won't get a design due to the nature of him being shattered and not being able to fully interact with Deltarune's world. He's more of like an omnipresent being in my mind. In my opinion, the Mystery Man sprite is like a piece of him that was left behind in Undertale, and Deltarune Gaster isn't the same as that piece. Also, Guarding 4814 asks, thoughts on the unsigned Valentine's letter? Who do you think sent it? I don't think there's a convincing non-gastery answer to this, but it is true that the way it's written has a lot of inconsistencies with how Gaster talks, despite all the resemblances, and I think that's because the person sending the letter is a specific piece of Gaster, different from the one who like speaks to us at the beginning that we're more familiar with. Because the letter talks a lot about like not being able to remember, which I feel like could be a symptom of being shattered. Who is the Eggman and what role will he play? The Eggman. So lame answer, but I think he could be another not too important, not too unimportant piece of Gaster. He is definitely a reference to Easter eggs, which is already what Gaster was in Undertale. Sorry, I promise I don't think everything is Gaster. Melanieist Neon asks, what are your predictions for the future of secret bosses, the Eggman, and the Weirdroot? Specifically, will any of them be connected in some way, and will they be mandatory for a true ending or just side content? I think that those things are all definitely connected in that they're explorations of the very concept of side content. Spamton is already a secret boss connected to the Weirdroot. I'm definitely interested to see how Deltarune will like reward you for doing all the side stuff, at least when it doesn't involve murder, because Toby Fox generally seems to celebrate the existence of like video game secrets and such, but a true ending feels a bit far-fetched. I don't think it'll be like required. Aderon asks, what shenanigans do you expect Jockington to have gotten into had he also been in the library when the Cybers world opened? That is a very good question. Jockington is a very cool guy, but he's also noted to not be very internet savvy, I feel. So maybe if he went to the cyber world, he'd have like an emo arc revealing his insecurities about how he's not actually that cool or good at everything, and he's under a lot of pressure, and I'm just describing berdly. Surexelon49 asks, is it possible that the three heroes mentioned in the prophecy aren't necessarily going to be Susie, Kris, and Ralsei? I kinda like the idea that the prophecy actually has rather loose rules, but for various reasons I'm also fairly confident that it was created by Gaster and that he's also the one who told it to Ralsei. I don't think Ralsei is entirely correct in his worldviews or his way of following the prophecy, obviously, and I'm not even sure the prophecy is a good thing, but I think it's real, and I think at the very least that Ralsei is the prince. Because Ralsei's issue is that, like, the prophecy is all he's ever known, and it consumes his entire identity and priorities, and it's just more interesting to me if those views are bad for him, but he also is the actual prince. The Ghostly Dreamer asks, what's your opinion on Ralsei and Kris's relationship, just in general? This is another fandom discourse topic that irritates me a little. I think people just aren't willing to see any middle ground with their relationship. Like, I think if Kris hated or even actively disliked Ralsei, they would take damage from his tea. And people kind of just forget about the fact that Kris only heals 70 HP from Noelle, like that's only 10 more than Ralsei, so they must be like at least lukewarm about him, unless they also don't like Noelle as much as the fandom assumes they do. So I'm sure Kris has a lot of mixed feelings about Ralsei for many reasons. It's hard to say exactly how they feel, but I think we're jumping to conclusions if we assert so firmly that they don't care about him. And it's actually similarly difficult to parse how they feel about Noelle currently, but the difference is that we know a lot about those two's past together, so people just don't rely on the teas as much. Also, I do think it's a little silly when people refer to it as tea theory, like the idea that the tea's healing reflects the characters' opinions on each other is somehow a theory and not an obvious inference. This box, and a lot of other people, asked favorite song by Toby Fox or otherwise. For Toby Fox music, I especially like Attack of the Killer Queen, any of Berdly's themes, any of Lancer's themes, It's Pronounced Rules, and any of Metaton's themes. Those are the ones I have on my playlist anyway. The Pink Coin 1512 asks, what do you think of Deltarune, Undyne? Not much to think of her right now. I hope she quits her job. Do you think Deltarune alphys will be more important? I'd like her to be, but I don't see much suggesting it. Although there is a lot of evidence that Sans is from Deltarune, and Undertale Sans worked with alphys on sciencey, gastery things that might have been for the purpose of returning to Undertale. So there's that. She should also maybe quit her job. I'm not sure she likes being a teacher or is remotely good at it, but maybe things will get better for her. What do you think of Undertale Undyne? The best Undyne, and also the one who quit her job, presumably. I assume the Royal Guard doesn't exist on the surface? Pasta Plays 22 asks, what do you think Asriel's role in the story will be? Does he have an important role, or is he just coming back from college? Asriel is pretty significant to Kris and their issues with like feeling inferior and such, and with them being the main character, their arc may last until near the end of the game. So I could see Asriel coming home like chapter 7, maybe accompanying Kris along with perhaps Des in the endgame Dark World and having some of his own struggles with being like the town's golden boy revealed. Glare Ninja asks, which game do you consider better now while Deltarune is incomplete, and which will you consider better in the future? I think Deltarune will be better when it's complete, even just on the basis that writing-wise, it's already proven itself to be just as good, and Toby Fox has more experience and also a team to help him. Obviously the graphics are better and the gameplay's more interesting, although Undertale's gameplay was pretty serviceable for a 5-hour game. Currently though, I can't say Deltarune is better when it's not even halfway done, and I'm not entirely sure what any of its thesis statements are actually going to be or how effectively it's going to present them. Is Gaster good, evil, or morally ambiguous? From the little hints at Gaster's morality we do get, he looks forward to creating a better future, he wants to help, assuming this letter is him, and he thinks Kris, Susie, and Noelle are very, very wonderful. He seems to be responsible for the player's presence in Deltarune, and as I've said, I don't think we're an inherently bad force, but we can do the Snowgrave route, so there's that. Frankly, I'm a little salty about his disregard for Darkner's personhood. Literally none of them, including ralsei, get a reaction for choosing their names in the vessel creation. Ralsei's a much better guide than Gaster's ominous ass has ever been, and he's the harbinger of the prophecy Gaster may be created, so give him some credit. Leon Leoxy asks, will you make a video specifically about Kris? The short answer is yes, eventually. The thing with Kris is that at the moment, I don't think I have anything unique to add to the discussion about them. There's a lot of good videos about them as a person and their role in the game, and it's the same story with Kris and Susie's relationship. But I could see myself making videos like that when more chapters come out. Who is the knight and why is it rules card? They do share the same initials. Kimu Kola asks, what are your plans if chapters 3 and 4 get delayed even longer? Do you have more Deltarune theories or things you want to make videos on? I don't have any major Deltarune ideas at the moment, but I could see myself uploading some shorter videos about it, like 5 to 10 minutes. I don't think it's that much longer till 3 and 4 come out. I might also do some more surveys, but I need good ideas for them. And I'll talk more about this later, but I absolutely have non-Deltarune ideas. Angel-KM8SR and a surprising amount of other people asked, thoughts on Krerdly? Okay, the big reveal. I like it. Mostly just for the funnies, but I think there are genuine reasons to like it, even if I sort of steer away from the more overly romantic and cutesy content of them. I think it's a bit lame when people act like the ship only exists as a pair the spares thing, because history lesson, it was originally a joke. When Chapter 2 first came out, essentially nobody was shipping them seriously, and in some of the earliest Krerdly content, Kris doesn't even like berdly and is just using him to piss off the soul. But I think then some people were like, oh, their relationship does have some actual substance, and as I've gone over, berdly doesn't really hate Kris. The relationship is pretty important to his character, actually. It's like a plot beat that he's jealous of their closeness with Noelle and salty about them liking Susie more than him. I think the most valid argument about the ship not making sense is that Kris doesn't seem to like berdly, and I'll admit we don't have a ton of information on how they feel about him, but they do play games together and Kris has engaged in seemingly friendly pranking and mind crappery with him in the past. Which does make me wonder if maybe they used to be better friends, but then something happened, but that's probably just overthinking. Funnily enough, despite the amount of Krerdly questions, I wasn't asked about any other ships, but you're going to get my tier list anyway because it's short. So, I am actually invested in this. It's just Suzelle. I'm not that big of a shipper, but I think I've made my case on these two. They're good. It's good. I like it. Mostly just ship it for the bit. So I can enjoy genuine content of these occasionally, but most of the appeal is just that it's funny. Krerdly, of course, I've been over that. Soriel. Soriel is fun. It can be kind of sweet. Mostly it's funny. I feel like Toby Fox does like to kind of joke about the possibility that there could be something going on with them, although I don't think it'll ever be like canon. And then we have Rules X Queen. One-sided or not, I think it's pretty funny. We might see this be canonized in the future. Probably not, though. I would like to see them co-parenting Lancer, though. That would be fun. Don't ship personally, but deserves its own honorary tier. Ralsei. As you probably know, I really like Ralsei and Susie's relationship on a platonic level. I think it's super, super important and people sleep on them. So even though I don't really like this romantically, I prefer Suzelle. I think Susie is a lesbian. I feel a little bit defensive when people are like, oh, this makes no sense, because yes, it does. Yes, it does. It absolutely makes so much sense. So I am a Ralsuzi ally. I want them to be one-sided tragic Yuri, Catti x Noelle. Catti might have a crush on Noelle based off of like the poetry she writes about her. She also might not because she writes the same kind of poetry about Jockington. I think it would be nice and fun if like Catti has feelings for Noelle, but she has to accept that Noelle doesn't like her back and accept that Noelle likes Susie and respect her agency. Don't ship, but God, I wish they interacted. This is Ralsei and Berdly and then Ralsei and Noelle. I understand the thematic purpose of like Ralsei being ignored all the time, but we do miss out on what could be really fun duos. And then the rest of the Kris ships are platonic only for me. Entropic Voxels asks, how likely will Krerdly be canonized? Extremely unlikely, and I wouldn't really want it to be, unless it's like implied in a single line in some post-game content, because that would be funny. Ms. Poe Kirby asks, favorite fanon depictions of Berdly? Him being a closeted trans femme is pretty popular, but we like him being out as trans mask. I can definitely vibe with trans femme or trans mask Berdly, although one thing I didn't mention in my video, I can definitely vibe with trans femme or trans mask Berdly, honestly. One thing I didn't mention in my video is that his misconceptions about romance and forced attraction to Susie could be pretty easily read as aromantic, and or gay, but I like aromantic Berdly in particular. He's literally the flag colors. I doubt it'll happen, but it'd be super cool if this was actually further implied in canon. I would love for him to have a background arc realizing he doesn't need romance to be happy. There's a lot of queer rep in Toby's games, but not any aroace rep yet, and it would really suit Berdly. Charles Fisher-KH5SW asks, will Berdly survive the normal route? Yes, absolutely. I don't think the normal route is ever going to be as dark as the weird route, at least not until the late game, and I can't imagine there'd be any circumstances where Berdly dies. I don't think he needs to die to accommodate for him also being dead in the weird route, especially when they've already decided to add yet another variation on his status in the normal route because he can hurt his arm. DookieFace7083 asks, how important do you think the religious themes of Deltarune are? So I think it's important to remember that religious allusions are often purely shorthand for certain ideas and don't actually carry any messages about religion itself, so that could be the case here. Although making a major figure in your game literally called the Angel is a pretty big deal, and it's likely we'll get a church Dark World, so yeah, seems kinda important. Remy the Mannequin, hi Remy, asks, what chapter will feature Catti and Jockington and what role will they play? So there's a pretty legitimate argument that they won't go to the Dark World because of their lack of voice splips, which really sucks because I love Catti so much and want her to be important and playable so bad, but maybe she can still visit the Dark World and just play a smaller role than Berdly and Noelle did? I think Catti would be an antagonist, and Jockington, if he shows up, would act as her weapon and mostly play a comedy role. Although I did just make an entire video emphasizing how Deltarune doesn't really have major characters that are solely comedic relief, so maybe he just wouldn't go to the Dark World with her? Maybe I'm not imaginative enough to do Jockington justice. Anyway, Catti seems like someone who would choose the Dark World over the Light World, so she'd probably be an antagonist, and I also think her relationship with Noelle and consequently her hatred for Susie would be important. Again, some people want a Suzelle rejection storyline, I want a Cattiel rejection storyline. Tobacco Crow 4432 asks, DR theory you wholeheartedly believe in / would like to see happen? My biggest stretch of a theory is of course Berdly being desified. I understand how vague that is. I also really like the idea that the Deltarune we're playing is a take 2 and the timeline was previously reset after the roaring happened, although it arguably is borrowing some beats from Undertale in that case. Nautilus 2342 asks, where do you think Noelle's character will go in the weird route? I like to think she'll successfully prevent us from controlling her again, but in her desperation to not be controlled, she's going to make some oopsies. Like, well, it'd be very sweet if her relationship with Susie was a beacon of light in the darkness of this route. I want them to become toxic Yuri. I think that Noelle wants to reclaim her agency through being even more forward with Susie, and they're going to take things a bit too fast, and it'll be too much with everything else going on, and Susie being unaware of everything that went down. As for other things besides being gay, Noelle will probably cause the roaring or something, I don't know. Guys Doing Stuff 9561 asks, who will be the next force to kill in the weird routes of future chapters? I'm glad you asked because I firmly believe there won't be new weird routes in future chapters. I think it's extremely specific to Noelle's circumstances, not just emotionally, but also that she specifically has these game-breaking tendencies. And like I've said, she's only able to freeze enemies using Ice Shock anyway because it's the cyber world and their computer programs. Maybe now that we've used her to unlock the weird root, we'll be able to break the game in other ways, but killing is a Noelle thing in my mind. I think it'd get repetitive and boring if we made other characters go through a very similar process. Unlike Undertale No Mercy, the weird root isn't trying to be grindy and boring. Honestly, the Noelle segment would have become grindy and boring if it went on for much longer, I feel. Also, from like a gameplay perspective, the idea that the weird root has to be manually continued doesn't make sense to me because then there'd need to be a ton of variations depending on where you stopped the weird root if you chose not to continue it, and I think the game only has 3 save files for a reason. It would be too much variation based on choice for the your choices don't matter game. At Wowie-Zowie asks, victim blaming is wrong, but do you believe Noelle has a degree of responsibility in the weird root? I think it could be interesting if she did have more responsibility and moral ambiguity in the route than the game presents, but I think she's largely too unaware of what she's actually doing for her choices to really be her own. And that's not to mention how forceful the player has to be, and also the literal magic involved through the trance effect. She takes so much self-gaslighting to even get to the point where she half believes that what she's doing is good for her self-reliance. So yeah, I don't really like when people say that her being vulnerable to our abuse proves that she always had this darkness within her, because the truth is anyone can be vulnerable to abuse and manipulation. Lancer is also a dark prince. What are your thoughts? Okay, I got a lot of comments mentioning this on my first video, so to clarify, I did not forget about Lancer being the king's son. I just don't really consider him a candidate for being the Prince of the Dark, because he's referred to with the title Prince exactly once and is otherwise just the king's son, which is very weird, so it feels intentional. So given Deltarune's religious symbolism, it seems like the title Prince from the Dark is a reference to the phrase Prince of Darkness, a term used to refer to Lucifer, who Ralsei is already connected to with him being a goat and having red horns. I think it's possible that at some point in the story, with Susie and Ralsei and Kris likely getting into conflict over the prophecy and Dark Worlds, there could be a plot point where the characters consider that Lancer could be the Prince from the Dark, and maybe Lancer actually is capable of fulfilling the prophecy due to being a prince if it's flexible like that, but if there is only one specific character predestined to be the prince, I don't think it would be Lancer as opposed to Ralsei. Looking at the image we're given of the prince, it's a hooded figure. Ralsei is still wearing his hood when he delivers the prophecy. It has long feet like Ralsei. It's not really round enough to be Lancer. There's flame surrounding it, and at least in Undertale, boss monsters are associated with fire. And concept art straight up labels this figure as Ralsei, despite Kris just being labeled as human. Cherry Tree 3400 asks, how do you think Ralsei doesn't get petrified in other Dark Worlds? My bet's on it being that he belongs wherever either the player is so he can guide them, or Kris and Susie are due to the prophecy. So the most literal answer here is that he's made of pure darkness, but I also like the idea you mentioned that he belongs wherever the player is, or belongs wherever Kris is, since he may be a manifestation of their issues with being human and such. People like to point out some of his unique qualities, like not being petrified, as evidence that he can't be a darkener, but I actually think that's because he's like the ultimate darkener, kind of. Like, he is Darkeners at their most extreme. He is fully committed to the idea that he only exists to serve Lighteners. And that's another reason why I feel like it makes thematic sense for him to be the actual Prince of the Dark. Michelle Whittaker 6009 asks, how do you think Dark Worlds work? Are Darkeners real people? Did their lore actually happen? I recently watched the Lego movie, and I think the Dark World is closer to how the Lego world works. I don't remember the Lego movie very well, but I do want to rewatch that soon. I definitely think Darkeners do literally exist and aren't straight up imaginary, but they do seem to represent fiction and entertainment to some extent. As for if their backstories actually happened, I like the idea that the Dark Worlds already exist and creating a fountain just makes a gateway to them, but then Queen's line, today they deigned to create this world, really throws a wrench in that. I think it's just last Thursdayism. Aelpip asks, what are your thoughts on the shadow crystals? I'm not confident in this. I don't really think that much about the shadow crystals, but I like the idea that the image shown of Susie glaring at Kris has to do with like a previous timeline where she used to be even less close with them. How important do you think the secret bosses are going to be to the plot? They're absolutely very important to the themes, but I think it's an integral part of their existence that they're secret, they're entirely optional side content. So I don't think that they can ever affect the main plot of the normal route, although it would be fitting if they continued to be major players in the weird route. A lot of people asked more broadly just do you have any hot takes on Deltarune or Undertale, so I'll share one that I feel like I haven't gotten the opportunity to express yet, and that's Alphys' great sin was not the creation of the amalgamates, it was specifically that she hid what had happened. Nobody could have predicted that they would end up like that, and her experiments were consensual and under Asgore's orders. These were comatose and/or dying monsters whose families donated their bodies. You can't just say Alphys experimented on people and leave out that context. The amalgamate situation is not ideal, but they wouldn't be better off dead, and the pacifist ending shows them happily reunited with their families, which they were previously deprived of because Alphys blamed herself and was too ashamed to come forward about their condition. That was her wrongdoing, that was in her control. The amalgamate's creation wasn't really anyone's fault. I think when people focus too much on the creation of the amalgamates themselves, they're kind of missing the point of that whole story. Caliburn Absolute 8517 asks, what do you think we can expect from Noelle's mother in future chapters? Would it be redundant to put her into significant focus after Noelle's arc with Queen? Very good question. I think there's a lot more going on with the mayor, because if she wasn't going to be important, they would have just shown her to us already instead of building her up off screen. The festival seems like a good time to meet her since that's what she's so busy with, and there seems to be more going on with her being like the shadowy figure that was guarding the holiday house, presumably. I do see the point you bring up about her already being explored through Queen, but Noelle being willing to stand up to her mom, while a necessary first step, probably won't solve the entire problem, because the reason the mayor's so overprotective is probably partially related to having already lost one of her daughters. Would Toby Fox make Berdly a party member if I ask really nicely? Well, everyone knows that one Twitter user is solely responsible for the Snowgrave route existing, so I'd give it a shot. Leon Leoxy asks, any in-depth thoughts about the Flower King chapter theory? I talked about this in my Dreamer video, but I'm more partial to Asgore showing up in chapter 3 instead of there being a Flower King chapter, although people did correctly point out to me that Flower King can follow the theme of entertainment because of the comic books in it, which makes me a little bit more convinced. Frudi_sh8so asks, where do you think the next Dark Worlds are? And I have some really boring answers. So I know the newsletter is making people think that Chapter 4 will have a Holiday House Dark World, but since we're already going to have a Dark World based off of a home, I think it makes more sense for the Holiday Family chapter to still be at the church. You know, a single teaser photo can be kind of misleading. I believe people used to think Chapter 2 would be hospital-themed because of this. Obviously, we already know what Chapter 3's Dark World is, but the location of Chapter 4's doesn't seem like something they would want to spoil for us. So I feel like if that was the case, we wouldn't have been shown this. Anyway, I think we're getting a festival Dark World, probably the hospital. I'd really like to see the graveyard, personally. And of course, the bunker. DookieFace7083 asks, what do you think of the chess theory? Probably not true, but it's interesting. I think the connections it makes between King and Queen's behavior and the roles of their respective pieces in chess is pretty clever. Thoughts on Kris pronoun discourse and your opinion on what their gender is? Okay, I think Kris is non-binary. Aside from their friends and family calling them they and how them being their own person is an important part of the game, what convinces me that this is the intention instead of it being up to interpretation is the presence of other queer and trans characters. Mettaton and Mew Mew are trans allegories. Napstablook and fucking Ice Wolf go by they them, and they aren't protagonists. Ice Wolf refers to themselves as they them, by the way. There's no question of other characters not knowing what their gender is. And yes, Toby Fox never uses the word non-binary, but he also never uses any queer labels. And we still know Alphys is bisexual because she's attracted to men and women. It's a show-don't-tell kind of representation. In Ye Olde Earthbound Halloween hack document, Toby talks about how oh, you should be able to recognize that Dr. Andonuts is supposed to be gay without him explicitly coming out on screen. And while this was a long time ago, it seems to be the only thoughts on queer representation he's ever publicly expressed. Anyway, pronouns do not necessarily equal gender in real life, but a character going by exclusively they, them, being non-binary is the most straightforward reading here, and you don't actually care what gender label Kris has, you care about if it matters what pronouns you use for them. And I think that using they is the respectful thing to do, because they aren't real, but non-binary people are, and it's strange that people only ever use the canon pronouns of Susie and Ralsei, but when it comes to a character using they/them, that's suddenly up to interpretation unless explicitly stated otherwise, sometimes even for characters that aren't protagonists. If it was supposed to be up to interpretation, it failed because essentially everyone who thinks that and doesn't use they/them for Kris has the same interpretation that they are a boy. It's more varied with Frisk and Kara, but it's incredibly rare to see Kris called she for whatever reason. And I don't think this topic is worth being aggressive about. For your own sake, you should probably just avoid arguments about this entirely, but you have to understand that it sucks to see people bend over backwards to say Kris isn't non-binary when trans people are still so marginalized in real life, and it shouldn't be that big of a deal to accept. All that being said, please don't let this topic dominate the comment section. I promise you every possible argument for or against Kris being non-binary has already been made. Greg823 asks, thoughts on fan music / fan content in general. I don't actively look for fan-made Deltarune music, but I think I liked RV Pine's stuff. Not exactly the same as fan-made music, but I love covers of songs that use like different instruments from the original. As for fan content in general, I engage with fan art all the time, and while I'm not an active fanfic reader, I've definitely enjoyed a few fics. I think we have a very talented fandom. Some other people asked about AUs specifically, and I am completely out of the loop with those. Magic Fox Gaming 1500 asks, what is your favorite Undertale fan song? I haven't listened to very many fan songs at all, but my favorite is the Dr. Gaster one. I think I heard that a while before I played Undertale. Smelly2897 asks, likely plot point / direction Deltarune could go in that you would dislike or even hate. Could this ruin your enjoyment of the story? I think I have enough faith in the quality of Deltarune's writing so far that any likely direction it could go in, even if I don't like the sound of it on paper, I wouldn't end up hating. But some things I don't want to see are like the story leaning too much into Ralsei's connections with Asriel and thus like affirming the idea that Ralsei isn't his own person instead of condemning it, Susie always believing the right thing and never making any serious mistakes after chapter 1, but I'm not really too worried about these things happening. They're more so fanon attitudes I don't like. I guess I just don't want Deltarune's ending to be too sad. Speaking of sad endings, Super Stud World Guy asks, by the end of the game, will Kris have to seal the Closet Dark Fountain and say goodbye to all the Darkners? I can see why people would come to that conclusion. I don't think the Darkners will disappear forever because that seems really unfair to them. At most, they'll just be like permanently separated from Lightners, but I don't think Deltarune thinks escapism is inherently bad, so I'm not sure even that would happen. Kemragik asks, how long do you think Rudy has left? Okay, so Rudy's death occurring during the events of Deltarune does not really make sense to me, actually. I think if it happened, it would feel rather jarring for the story to focus on literally anything else, because that's such a huge event, it would have to take precedence over a lot of other things. Deltarune only takes place over a week, so it having an ending that's even somewhat happy would not be possible if one of the main characters up and loses their father. Even if the game's ending is largely sad, I think it's going to be because of more thematically relevant factors and not just like Noelle losing her dad. The way I see it, the purpose of Rudy's illness is to give Noelle a real-world struggle that's completely out of her control. Of course, it wouldn't mean much if she overcame this struggle by it just disappearing and Rudy getting better. She needs to accept the way things are. And the span of Deltarune's plot isn't nearly long enough for her to accept his actual death. Rather, I think this subplot will be concluded with her learning to live with the uncertainty of his condition, but choosing to move forward with hope, or maybe even accepting that he will die soon and making the most of the time she has left with him. So I could see us getting a prognosis that he won't survive his illness, but I think he will still be alive at the end of the game. At HP8167 asks, who are your top picks for people in Hometown who will go to the Dark World? So you guys already know about Catti, and while I talked about thinking Asgore will be in Chapter 3, I'm not opposed to Undyne and Napstablook also showing up as like more minor characters because I like them and it would be fun. Speaking of Napstablook, I'd love to see like a Ghost Cousins chapter in general, but that might be a bit of a reach. Don't Under 2005 asks, do you think there will be any more connections between Undertale and Deltarune besides what we've seen so far? Toby Fox did say that just because they're separate worlds doesn't mean there will be no connections at all, so I think there kind of have to be. For example, Sans is like probably from Deltarune, although I don't see anything being explicitly confirmed. I think we'll just get more like vague implications of connections. AnnoyedCat4705 asks, how long has the player been in control of Kris considering the birdcage? Was something else in control of them at some point? So considering we are the player, I don't think we could have been controlling them before we started playing the game. I don't like the idea that Kris has dealt with possession for the majority of their life because that's sad, and other characters paint a very consistent characterization of their real self outside of anyone's influence, but it's hard to deny that the birdcage strongly implies that this isn't their first rodeo. Alternatively, maybe their soul is special or weird, so they've had lifelong issues with needing to remove it for like non-possession reasons. Probably not. GG Blister asks, do you think Penumbra Phantasm will be in Deltarune and where? Penumbra Phantasm isn't something I'm really in the know about. I don't remember why people think it's significant. My take is that Toby might just like the word penumbra. Similarly, Ace Thomas RH1YH asks, what's your opinion on the friend image? Do you believe Chester Cat friend, Mike friend, or a mix of the two, device friend, or something else? And I don't really know what any of that means. I think image friend is just a creepy face in Queen's basement that's supposed to look like Spampton. Maybe there's something I'm missing. It has like an all caps name in the files, but I don't know what else there is to it. Basically, whenever I hear image friend or Penumbra Phantasm, my brain shuts off, I'm sorry. RifleZen6049 asks, do you think Gerson/Alvin/Lord of the Hammer will have importance later? Okay, for a long time I was conflicted on Alvin's importance because this is weird as hell, but people were like, well, the only way for him to be important is if he's a knight, and he can't be the knight because he's boring and he doesn't have a face sprite. But I think I feel pretty firm that like, yeah, there's no way there won't be something going on with him. Going back to the idea that there's multiple knights, I can easily accept him being one of them, even if I can't accept him being the knight. But with or without that possibility, I'd still think he's important, even if minorly. His father Gerson actually has a similar role in Deltarune that Gaster did in Undertale. Like, he's not an Easter egg, but he was a very influential figure who's now gone, and Alphys has to fill his shoes. He's a fiction author in a game with themes of escapism. His bench has a quote about taking inspiration from dreams, which Dark Worlds are often compared to, and his series, Lord of the Hammer, may be relevant to Deltarune's religious themes because that's a reference to Lord of the Rings, which was heavily influenced by its author's Catholicism, and his son is a priest. And then we have Alvin's ominous-ass dialogue, and it's like, yeah, I think this all has something to do with something. 32-Bit Sandwich asks, do you think the roaring will actually happen, and what do you think some characters will do in reaction to it? So people do argue that the roaring has to happen because of Chekhov's gun, like, it was introduced, so now something has to happen with it. But so long as the roaring continues to be relevant and the characters continue to fight against it, it wouldn't be going against Chekhov's gun for it to not happen. Plenty of stories center on trying to prevent apocalyptic events, and the characters often succeed without said events ever happening. But it's not at all unreasonable to think that we will get to see the roaring, even if it gets stopped after the fact. That seems like the most direct way for questions about, like, what even are the Titans to be answered. As for what the characters will do in reaction to it, I think they will lose their shit. Yarshmellow2323 asks, thoughts on the Knight's meta-narrative purpose? That's a big one. If we consider Dark Worlds to be escapism, then I think the Knight making them would represent creators like authors, game developers, artists, etc. I think in some ways creation could be considered the ultimate act of escapism. And additionally, all obstacles and conflict in a story are engineered by its creator, so this fits into that possible motive I mentioned much earlier. I'm not saying Gerson is a knight, but it feels connected, okay? And our last question of this section, the Pink Coin 1512 asks, which Deltarune character would you be most likely to give scritches? Which is the easiest question ever, catti. Shit, I need to come up with something funnier. Sans? Kudos if you've watched this far. This is the non-Deltarune section for cool people only. To start, a lot of people asked if I plan on making more non-Deltarune videos, and the answer is yes, definitely. Deltarune's likely going to be the most popular thing on my channel for the foreseeable future, but the Digital Circus video did do surprisingly well, although I think that's partially thanks to that show being such a well-known hot topic, and more importantly, I don't want to be confined to any one thing. I have plenty of thoughts on non-Deltarune media. For example, I'm planning to make a Spy Family video, and I would love to talk about Kaguya-sama Love is War. Not just anime though, I'm also interested in anime video games. A lot of people asked specifically if I would ever make a Your Turn to Die essay, that's where my profile picture comes from, and I probably will, but only after the final chapter comes out. I had a super intense fixation on that game for a lot of 2021, but my interest in it is very passive at the moment, so I'm gonna wait a little while. I'm sure most people feel very differently, but I'm honestly not ready for the game to be over, so non-Kidai can take his sweet time. Melanieist Neon asks, what inspired the name Stuffed Alpaca? So basically, before I ever planned to make a channel, I had this as my YouTube profile picture. Yes, that's Kyoko Kirigiri, and my name was a stuffed alpaca in all lowercase, and when I made the channel, I couldn't think of a better name. Ironically, I do happen to have an alpaca puppet that I was attached to when I was younger, but they're not like my favorite animal or anything. What inspired you to start your creative endeavors? For YouTube videos specifically, I joined Andrew Cunningham's Discord server in August of last year because I was bored and lonely, and having discussions in the lore pit, which I no longer go to, inspired me to write the script for my first video, which I took forever to finish and then decided to entirely rewrite before I finally posted the video in February. I got into drawing because of warrior cats. I used to only draw warrior cats until a few years ago, and as for writing, I've wanted to pursue that since I was like 5. What are some of your OCs and may I consume them? I am so glad you asked. I have exactly one designed OC and her working name is Elaine. I really don't like her face in this concept art. She kind of looks like a Lego, but anyway. She's actually the main character of a game I want to eventually make in RPG Maker. I don't want to spoil too much because the actual premise is supposed to be a bit hidden and abstract and pretentious, but basically it's a puzzle game that's sort of a character study of her. She's a rather listless person who doesn't realize that she needs to change and connect with the people around her. Her design being kinda busy was sort of the point, but I may still tweak it at some point. A few people asked about my music taste outside of Toby Fox, and it's a bit all over the place. The best I can generalize it is I guess there's a lot of indie pop and some show tunes sprinkled in. I don't have a lot of artists that I specifically listen to a ton of music from, but I'll list off a few that I have like at least 3 songs from on my playlist. It's a pretty short playlist. I like Billy Joel. The only concert I've ever been to was a Billy Joel concert. AJR, Olivia Rodrigo, Mitski, Marina, The Hoosiers, The Scary Jokes, and then one indie artist I'm really into is Sir Chloe. Yarshmallow2323 asks, would I talk about Has-Been Hotel? So first of all, I'm happy that you'd want me to talk about a specific non-Deltarune topic, but I wouldn't make a Has-Been video because I don't want to make a video that's largely negative and there are enough videos on Has-Been discourse. I haven't watched the show in full, but I've watched a weird amount of reaction videos and know enough about it to form a somewhat legitimate opinion that it's not something I would like. On a surface level, the aesthetics and style of humor just aren't really to my taste, and then I have other issues with it, but we don't need to get into that. I'll make videos about stuff I have like nuanced or mixed opinions about, but probably not something that I just didn't like at all. HHGreg823 asks, thoughts on murder drones? I think it seems like a cool show, it's just not really to my taste. Unrelated, but my voice has been compared to the protagonist Uzi before, which is funny because it's also been compared to Pomni, and those are 2 very different characters. AnnoyedCat4705 asks, what's the video you've made that you're proudest of so far? So my first video about Susie and Ralsei has its issues since I'd never made a video before. I'm pretty sure the editing is like 3 seconds off compared to the audio, and it makes me cringe every time I see it. I don't know how that happened, but nobody's ever commented about it somehow. Anyway, it's also the video I worked the longest on and the most difficult for me to make, being my first, so I'm proud of myself for sticking with it. It also remains the strongest video idea I've had. I think it's something that's very much worth thinking about, integral to the game's themes, and woefully under-discussed. Remy the Mannequin, hi Remy, asks, personal question, how do you feel about your channel's traction? Has making videos always been a dream of yours, or is it just a hobby that's an extension of participating in fandom discussions? A super interesting question. Generally, I'm glad my channel's done well, obviously, since this video exists. I was not expecting that at all. I'm not sure that I've always wanted to make YouTube videos specifically, but I have wanted for years now to have more of a following for my creative endeavors. For a long time, I dedicated the majority of my free time to fan art, and I'm glad for how my skills have improved because of that, but I did get very little attention, partially because of my skill level, and also I drew too slowly to post consistently, even though it was how I spent most of my time. And you know, I enjoyed drawing, and obviously still do, but I never really felt satisfied with my abilities. But now that I've received, like, significant support, even though I'd still be creating either way, it feels more worth it now. So making videos is a bit of an extension of participating in fandom, but it's also a creative outlet. And of course, I agree that you should create for yourself primarily. Nothing is worth making if you aren't passionate about it, but when you work really hard on something, I think it's normal to want others to see it. It makes you feel more productive when you're not doing something just for yourself. I really like entertaining people, so I'm really grateful so many people are letting me entertain them. I even feel motivated to start thinking about original work. If it weren't for the support I've gotten here, I wouldn't have started drafting my hypothetical game I mentioned earlier. In summary, I'm really, really happy and everyone is really nice, and thank you. I don't know how to transition from that. Let's do some rapid-fire, mostly food-related questions. What's your third favorite color? Orange. Favorite flavor of ice cream? Moose track, so like chocolate or vanilla ice cream with like the chocolate chunks and mini peanut butter cups. Burger or hot dog person? Pizza is also an option. Of the three, I'd pick pizza, but I prefer burgers to hot dogs. I like cheese. All three are good though. Do you like pickles or cucumbers if you're like that? My sister loves pickles and will eat them out of a jar. I'll eat them if they're on my burger and like them well enough, but they are strong, so I wouldn't eat them by themselves. Can you do a backflip? No. Does pineapple belong on pizza? No. As a rule of thumb, sweet things don't belong on cheese unless it's cheesecake, which doesn't really count. What's your favorite imaginary color? Polka dots. Have you read Homestuck? Read the first 10 pages once and got bored. How gay are you? I'm bisexual, so somewhere between 200 and 400%. What are the exact coordinates of your home and what times do you leave? I don't leave my house, so don't worry about it. What's your favorite tea flavor? Sparkling water pineapple tea from Trader Joe's. Not sure if that counts as tea. I started drinking it as a replacement for soda. I don't really like normal tea. A lot of people asked what my favorite game, show, etc. is, or just more broadly what other media I'm into. So, for like text-heavy games, I of course like Your Turn to Die and Witch's Heart. Well, my Danganronpa phase is long over. I do follow the Fangans Project Eden's Garden and Despair Time, although the latter is a video series, not a game. For games that I enjoy for like game reasons, I have endured several bouts of Stardew Valley addiction and similarly played Cat Tales, which is like if a Stardew type game was inspired by warrior cats, and probably my favorite game to play is Breath of the Wild, despite still not having finished it or played Tears of the Kingdom. I'll get around to it. For shows, funnily enough, the only non-anime that come to mind are Breaking Bad and the Don't Hug Me I'm Scared TV show. Besides anime I've already mentioned, I really liked The Apothecary Diaries, Madoka Magica, and had a very long fixation on Bungo Stray Dogs up until about a year ago. For book series, I've already mentioned Warrior Cats, and I've also been revisiting the Wings of Fire series through the graphic novel adaptations. I swear I read books that aren't for preteens, they just aren't series. Although I do want to start The Locked Tomb. Nautilus2342 asks, what do you think of Your Turn to Die? Is it video fuel or no? I've already addressed the video fuel part, but I think Your Turn to Die is an excellently written game that everyone should try. Large casts are hard to write well, and large casts where people are constantly dying are even harder to write, so it's very impressive. The Ghostly Dreamer asks, who's your favorite Your Turn to Die character? You'll find that I have a hard time selecting favorite characters in things, and I do like nearly every character in the cast a great deal, but to list a few of my top favorites, I think they would be now, obviously, Sarah, Kai, Hinako, Alice, Mai. I really like Kyutaro. I was actually a huge defender of him even before 3B came out when most people still hated him. I also have to give an honorary mention to Anzu because my Tumblr URL is still named after the ship Sarah Anzu, and I'm never changing it even though I'm not super into the ship or even rare pairs in general anymore. Tobacco Crow 4432 asks, most out there idea for a video at the moment, and do you think you'll actually do it? Good question. It would be a video talking about why the show Oshinoko is a guilty pleasure of mine despite its eccentricities, and no, I don't think I'll make it. Nunny Nugget asks, do you just do analysis of other works like Deltarune and such, or do you also create some of your own material? I like to draw fan art as well, which isn't analysis, but as for completely original work, that stuff currently just exists in my head, but I want to make it a reality like that game I mentioned. Scalene Triangles 2520 asks, what are your other hobbies besides video making? So I don't know if this is surprising or not, but I'm actually a theater kid. My main extracurricular is school plays. I like to draw digitally, of course, and hypothetically, I like to write stories, but in practice, I don't actually do that ever. Although I have been dabbling in poetry a little bit recently, I actually got something published in my school's literary magazine last year, which isn't super difficult to do, but when I realized it got in, I kind of regretted it and asked to be anonymous since the poem was super personal, and they were like, yeah, we can do that, but it got published with my name, so I think they forgot. Fogir von Dreitveld asks, do you like wearing earrings? Yes, I have a lot of earrings because I'm hard to buy gifts for, so my mom started getting me a bunch of cheap earrings from like Claire's for my birthday and Christmas every year, so I had to tell her I had too many. I'm jealous of people who can wear like a lot of jewelry regularly though, because I'm kind of sensitive to the feeling of wearing like necklaces and earrings and bracelets. Which is scarier, big robots or small robots? Small robots are more realistic and thus I find them more scary. Do you prefer making many friends over making a stronger connection with fewer friends? No, I think I'd prefer stronger connections. I'm kind of socially awkward in general, but I'm trying to get better. E-S2KJ asks, how do you feel about your analysis content getting more attention even though your animatics are also good? Okay, loaded question, damn. Thank you though. Saying animatics plural isn't really accurate since my first one was from before I really started this channel, but yeah, I thought my catabolic seed animatic would do a little better than it actually did because it is still Deltarune. I think the YouTube algorithm screwed that over a little bit because it doesn't really like when a channel like mine that posts mostly 20-ish minute videos posts something that's less than 2 minutes. Analysis and video essays were always the main plan for this channel. I draw super slowly anyway, so I don't resent that they're more popular or anything, but like, you guys should go watch the animatic. It took the same amount of time as a video essay to make and will take about 10% as much time as usual for you to watch. Dodge asks, what do you think of Starlow Undertale Yellow? I like Starlow. Undertale Yellow is a pretty well-made game. I have issues with like its writing, but I did find the characters pretty likable. CL Phantom Hive 2857 asks, does your favorite Witch's Heart character and the character who you believe is best written differ? My favorite characters, I think, are Claire, Rouge, and Noelle. I'd say Noelle is probably the best written out of those three. We don't know that much about Rouge, though. I think they're all pretty good. Do you have any predictions for Willardo's conclusion? At the time of recording, that game has come out, but I'm still waiting for it to get translated into English. I know nothing about it. And I do have some predictions. There seems to be this new demon that's been shown in the teaser material, and I wholeheartedly believe that this is the so far irrelevant shopkeeper Lucy imitating Claire. Who has the saddest backstory? Do you think any of the characters are kind of dramatic? Lime probably experienced the least happiness in her life, but I think because she never had anything, she also never lost anything, so arguably hers isn't the saddest. I think for me, both Noelle's backstory and his inevitable fate are the most heart-wrenching. But no, I don't think any of them are dramatic. They all had it pretty rough. Shivya Persad 7417 asks, what is your favorite Pokemon? So the only Pokemon game I've played was Sword and Shield, and by Sword and Shield I mean Sword. I didn't play both versions. Not a very good game, sadly, but ironically I did like the double sword Pokemon. I just looked it up, it's Doublade. I think I got assigned it by a random generator once. Do you get silly? Yes, always. Everything I say is a joke. Never take anything I say seriously, ever. Honk Yeah Arson asks, opinions on Worm on a String, do you have any? Worm on a String are beautiful, and unfortunately no, I don't have any. And the final question, KK Other Accountant Stuff asks, how was your day? My day was quite nice, thank you for asking. How was your day? Before I end this, I want to talk about the comic I've been drawing in the background. So for context, besides the hat, Ralsei's outfit in Chapter 2 is quite different from Chapter 1. The colors are different, it's not as torn and ragged, it's shorter, it has black sleeves, and it has a spade on the front instead of a heart like before. And these could all very well be unintentional inconsistencies, but to me it reads like Ralsei changed clothes in between chapters. So although it's not canon compliant since Lancer only shows up in Castletown once Kris and Susie return, I always thought it would be fun and cute if he was responsible for Ralsei wearing a spade. I'm just very interested in how Lancer is pretty fond of Ralsei from the get-go, but Ralsei, despite being very lonely, doesn't really reciprocate, he's just confused and slightly annoyed. It's unfortunate, it seems like he's just not as concerned with personally being friends to Darkners, even though he wants Kris and Susie to do that. But I like the idea that Lancer eventually grows on him. Anyway, this is a comic I've actually been wanting to make for over 2 years, but I never got around to it because I knew it would take me forever to finish. Again, I'm a very slow drawer. But when I decided to make this video, I realized I needed something to go in the background so I didn't have to edit visuals for the entire runtime, and I thought, how about a Deltarune speed paint? And here we are. And it did take me forever to finish, but it was a lot more fun than doing regular editing, and I finally got around to making the comic I wanted, all because of this channel. So again, thank you guys so much for your support over the past 9 months. I hope I can keep making videos that you guys like, and I hope you have a lovely day.